welcome to the Ascend Lab, and thanks for joining us for today's session on generative AI. Just to let you know that the session is going to be recorded. The camera is up here, so you're not on camera, but just so that we can share the content with some of those who weren't able to make it today. My name is Martin Mannion. I'm the partner leading the Artificial Intelligence and Data team here at Deloitte. And as you can imagine, this is a topic that we've been looking at for a while, and something that's been very prevalent in the media. It's hard to, well, it's not a day goes by where you don't hear whether it's a controversy or a benefit or something that's coming out in the media about generative AI. So what I'm hopefully going to do today is give you a bit of background on what it is, where it's come from, and talk about some of the benefits and the risks, and then some maybe of the misconceptions that are out there when it comes to generative AI. But what I'd like to do, actually, and just what I'll do, as I'm going through the deck, you'll notice that there are some unusual images. There is some content in there. So all of the images and the video that you're about to see have been generated using AI so that you get a practical example or a practical feel for some of the things that are possible using generative AI. So I'm going to roll the video.
Generative AI refers to the branch of artificial intelligence that focuses on creating new, original content, such as text, images, or music, based on patterns and data it has been trained on. It uses complex algorithms and neural networks to generate novel outputs that mimic human creativity. For non-executive board directors, generative AI has several implications. Firstly, it can assist in decision-making processes by providing insightful analyses and predictions based on vast amounts of data. It can also automate mundane tasks, freeing up time for directors to focus on strategic initiatives. Furthermore, generative AI can help identify emerging trends and opportunities, enabling directors to stay ahead in rapidly changing markets. However, ethical considerations, data privacy, and bias management are crucial to ensure responsible and fair use of generative AI in boardroom discussions and decision-making.
So this is a video that was put together, and it took, I'd say, between 5 and 10 minutes to build the video. What I did was I went on to ChatGPT, which is probably the most famous of the generative AIs that are out there, and I asked it to, in 115 words, because that's how many words that can be said in a minute, in 115 words, can you explain generative AI, and can you include some of the implications for non-executive directors? And within about 15 seconds, it produced the script that you heard here. I then took the script and went to eli.io, chose my avatar, chose the background, chose the voice, so the accent, and then the music, fed it the script, and within about 10 minutes, the video was rendered, and we were able to embed it into the presentation here. So very, very quick and easy way to be able to produce content. Now you will notice that there is a slight mismatch between the sound and the video, but ultimately, if you're sitting far enough away, it's not something that you're going to notice. And very realistic, I suppose, in terms of the avatar and then the blurred background that you've got. And ultimately, the background can be anything that you like. So very, very powerful in terms of generating that content, and obviously very quick as well to be able to put the video together. So that's given a little bit of an overview. Effectively, generative AI is an artificial intelligence that can produce content across a wide range of outputs. And we'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a few minutes. Well, what you'll see is there is a huge amount of hype out there at the moment. It was released late last year, and ChatGPT had over 1 million users within its first couple of days, and it continues to grow and become more and more prevalent. There is some very positive implications, I suppose, of ChatGPT and its ability to be able to respond to and answer human questions. But there are also a number of concerns out there when it comes to both ChatGPT and the more broader generative AI. So we've seen, say, Spotify, for example, have had to take content down from their music library because there were songs that were produced by a generative AI that were trained on very specific albums from two specific artists. And there were concerns over copyright infringement and IP violation. We've seen our own Department of Enterprise Trade come out to say that they're encouraging people to try it out, but not to use it for any sort of business use. And more we're starting to see that advice coming out from organizations, that they're encouraging people to understand what it is, but it's not ready for public consumption yet in terms of organizations and enterprise. So what I do now is talk a little bit about the evolution of AI. And AI has been around for a long time now, but ultimately it's exploded really in terms of its conversation over the past really 6 months. It started with really the first AI out there. The first real AI was produced by IBM, and they had a product called Deep Blue, which was the first what's called explainable AI, and it defeated the then world chess champion Garry Kasparov in a game of chess. And that was the first time that an artificial intelligence had beaten a human talent. And it's an explainable AI because it was able to explain the logic behind all of the moves that it was able to make. And really, that was the first one that came within the public consciousness. We then moved on, and IBM then produced Watson, which was an AI system, and it was designed to play the game Jeopardy. And it beat then the world champions of Jeopardy at the time. But it was able to respond to questions, but it was able to phrase the questions in the way that was required by the game, which was the answer needed to be put in the form of a question. So this was the first instance of the public having a conversation, so being able to ask a question and get a response from an artificial intelligence. We then moved on in 2011 with the release of Siri, and saying that word can spark a whole load of noises in people's pockets, but Siri is obviously, for those with Apple products, Siri is the product that allows you to engage and ask questions of it. It's on people's wrists, in their phones, and ultimately it's a productivity tool that's designed to allow you to engage with it, set up calendar invites, figure out where you're going, and ultimately ask questions of it. And this was the first conversational AI. It was then followed very closely by Alexa, Amazon's version of Siri, which has become the first home-based virtual assistant. And lots of people have Alexa embedded into TVs, different products around the home. You may have kind of dedicated devices for Alexa within the home. And again, this was designed for people to have conversations with, and it created a neural network that allowed for the product to engage a vast amount of information to be able to provide a response to a question. AlphaGo, so the first AI that came out was Deep Blue, and that was designed for the game of chess. And within that, there was a very limited number of moves that could be made within a chessboard. It was always thought that Go, which is another type of game and has a far more complex set of moves and combinations, I suppose, that it would never get to the point where Go, that an AI would be able to understand or be able to play Go. What they managed to do, so basically for every move with chess, the AI calculated all of the possible moves and decided on the best one. Go was different in that it wasn't going to be able to calculate all the moves. It had to come up with a creative way of defining what was the next best move for it. And this is the first instance of artificial creativity, whereby the AI was able to, within a limited set of options, choose the best option for it, and then be able to go on. And it then defeated the world's best players in the game of Go. And then in October of last year, we saw the release of Lensa, which was the first generative AI, which took real images and created avatars of humans based on images that have been uploaded. And this, again, really was the first mass adoption of generative AI, in that it was used by a very large number of social media users to create virtual avatars of pictures of themselves. So, as I say, this is the first example of generative AI, but then ChatGPT was released in November of last year, and ultimately this is nearly taken over. And when you say generative AI, it's nearly associated with ChatGPT. Within 5 days, there were 1 million users. I don't even know how many users. Most of the people that you engage with at this stage have given ChatGPT a go. They've tried asking questions. It's the first real generative AI that's cracked the public consciousness, that has put this artificial intelligence into people's hands, and people are starting to use it more regularly. It provides the ability to be able to answer English, whatever language. It says English here, but I've tried it in Spanish, in French, Italian, Chinese, in Irish. It will provide responses in almost any language to human questions that are asked of it. There is a move away from, there's starting to become a new profession out there called prompt engineering, which is basically trying to figure out the right question to ask in the right way to get the right answer. So it really has cracked the public consciousness. So there are limitations with ChatGPT. It was trained on, so it doesn't give the exact detail on what data it's been trained on, but the assumption is, or the current theory is, that it's been trained on all of the publicly available text information on the internet. So everything that's human legible in whether it's written, PDFs, documents, web pages, it's trained on everything up to October of 2021. So it's very interesting. I was putting together a session like this for a client of ours, and they have a grant scheme that has been in place for the last 20 years, but there's been a big change that's happened over the course of the last year. So I was looking to put together a video like the one we saw at the start to explain the grant scheme, just to make it relevant for the client. But it was totally unaware of all of the change that had happened in the last 18 months. So it gave a perfect answer if we were 18 months ago, but it was totally out of date. So it completely irrelevant. And me not working with that client, I had the video ready to go, I had it in the deck ready to go, and it was only that I'd shown it to somebody on the client account. They said, that's completely wrong. You're going to have to find something else.
So would that be updated with new version?
There's no plan at the moment to train it, because there's such an investment that goes into it, like the amount of processing that it, and the cost that it takes to process all of the data on the internet is huge, and the time it takes, it's very difficult to be able to maintain it right up to date. Now, what we've been able to do, so we've been working with our clients to try and find a way of producing a similar result on a smaller data set. So, for example, with some of the public sector clients, there's very large, there's volumes of data that are there around, say, different grant schemes or tax and duty manuals, or the types of volumes that are put into the public to guide and support people as they're either applying for things or submitting returns. So we've been able to build a smaller version of, say, ChatGPT that's trained specifically on that information. And because it's trained on a very small data set, it can be kept up to date much more frequently, and the amount of processing and cost that goes into it is much smaller. So ChatGPT in itself, as I say, it has a deadline or a draw line where there's nothing else that comes out of it. Or sorry, it's not aware of anything that's happened beyond a certain date, but it's possible to create smaller versions of ChatGPT, which aren't going to be cost prohibitive to organizations in building themselves.
Does it store something, if you ask it questions and all the questions that we ask, does it store any of that data for its own development, or does it store it related back to the individual who actually asked it in the first place?
It does. So ChatGPT, you'll notice when you ask it a question and it gives a response, there's a thumbs up and a thumbs down. Effectively, that's a feedback loop that goes back into the training of the model that it can use to update. Now, we don't know if it's actually using that, but it's storing the feedback that it's getting. So when it's trained again, the likelihood is that feedback will be incorporated into the new model.
Or the group that actually asked it in the first place, or is that disconnect?
We don't know. We don't know. So it's definitely connected to the question and the response, but we don't know if it's connected to the individual and how much information it holds on the individual that's asked the question.
I'm sorry, I was asking, then the ownership of ChatGPT and all that infrastructure and capital asset, what owns that?
It's an organization called OpenAI, which is ultimately funded by Microsoft, is behind ChatGPT. So it's the algorithm and the training set and all of the data that's produced by it is owned by OpenAI. Yeah. So, so what we can see, so obviously these are still relatively new and immature technologies, but it's moving very, very rapidly. So what we can see here is the evolution of artificial intelligence over the past number of years. So in this 2014 picture, this is the very first picture of a human face that was produced by an artificial intelligence. So you can see it's quite blurry, it's grayscale, but the evolution of it up to this point, so you can see in 2018, this is a digital avatar that was created by a generative AI. It's not a real person, but you can see the detail in the face. It's incredible, really is. And then as you step forward to 2023, you can see what's being produced. So you have cattle in the fields, you have the astronaut riding a horse on the moon. You have content, text, video, all of the various different types of content that are being generated. And like that, within this one here, you can input a set of text, and you can ask it to create synonyms, and you can ask it to, I suppose, make changes to the text that are there, along with generating the text itself. So it has moved incredibly quickly over the past number of years. The expectation is, when you see the jump from 2016 to 17 to 18 to 23, the expectation is that it's going to follow that sort of maturity trajectory, and that it's going to become even more and more powerful as we go forward. So that's a little bit about where it's come from and how it is. How it works is effectively, I'm going to use the ChatGPT example as we run through, because it's the easiest one to explain. It's the one that we know most about. The AI, so an algorithm is built, and it's trained on a very large data set called a large language model, or an LLM. And effectively, as I say, in ChatGPT, that LLM is all of the text data from the internet. And for anybody with a software engineering background, there's a Microsoft have a code repository called Git. We know for sure that it's been trained on that because of the maturity and its ability to be able to generate software or to generate code in all sorts of different languages. The user submits a prompt. So in the case of the video up above, the prompt was, in 115 words, can you explain generative AI and its implications for non-executive directors? And then the AI produces the new content. And these are all of the different types of content that are currently being produced. So we have 3D renderings, which for the likes of, say, manufacturing, or say in manufacturing, are very useful because you have a 3D rendering of what could be a very large engineering component or a manufacturing component. If you're looking to train people on how to fix things, how to replace parts, you have a 3D model that's generated that you're able to use to point or to work through. There is a big interest in the 3D renderings in the medical profession as well. So for the likes of surgeons, being able to engage with the 3D rendering of the human anatomy to be able to figure out how to perform surgeries, how to do different things. I mentioned software engineering. We're very confident that it has been trained on a very, very large code base across a wide range of different languages, and it's able to do conversions from one language to another. There are huge implications for the software engineering field. I've mentioned videos, so as I say, all the videos throughout the deck here have been produced by Gen AI. We have robotics or automation, so being able to automate an end-to-end process using generative AI. There are more specialized ones that we're starting to see. And then, as we saw in the video above, we have the speech from the avatar, with the text that was generated by ChatGPT, and then ultimately the video that was rendered within a few minutes. So it's almost a full range of content that's out there. It's now possible to start generating it using artificial intelligence. So the ecosystem, there are a small number of large players who are building out these large language models, so who are ultimately building an algorithm and training it on very large data sets. And they're the ones you can see here on the right. So as I mentioned, Microsoft have invested in OpenAI and have built Cloud have invested in DeepMind, and then they Meta are using it for the likes of the metaverse, so to start to build out the metaverse using generative AI. And then ultimately, all of the hardware that this runs on is produced by NVIDIA, who are one of the biggest chip manufacturers in the world. So I think their stock price was mentioned earlier. Their stock price has gone through the roof over the last 6 months because of the interest in this. And really, they're the only show in town when it comes to the hardware behind it all. Now, so on the right-hand side, then you can start to see the application landscape that are integrating with the large language models or the large foundational models. So the example of Eli.io, the application that built the video at the top of the deck, they'd be an example of the application landscapes. So they're not building the algorithms, they're not building the large language models. They're using APIs or they're integrating with the LLMs that are out there, and they're using them then to do new and innovative things. So producing videos or producing PowerPoint decks, Word documents, whatever it might be. This application landscape, what we'll see over the next couple of years is we'll have hundreds and thousands of these applications that come out, and then they'll start to consolidate around a few big players. So there's going to be a lot of acquisition, I think, so there'll be startups, there'll be drop-offs, and then there'll be a large amount of acquisitions that happen within this site. And we'll start to see maybe some of the big tech players either build the same capabilities as those in the application landscape, or they'll start to acquire them themselves. So it's going to be a very, very busy time for these organizations over the next couple of years. And it's hard to say, it's hard to hedge bets now at this stage because we just don't know how it's going to develop and what these players are going to do. So there are a number of misconceptions out there, and the media clippings at the top of them will give some sort of indication of some of the misconceptions. And people have inherent conceptions about AI. We have actually, again, the images here are generated using generative AI, but the explanations I'm going to use on why it's a misconception are also generated using AI. So I'll let you use your own judgment as to whether the AI is self-fulfilling or whether we need to take it with a pinch of salt. But we have here the generative AI will replace human creativity, and so what the AI says about that is generative AI is a tool that can assist humans in the creative process, but it cannot replace human creativity. While generative AI can generate new ideas and possibilities, it's still limited by the data that it's trained on and the algorithms that it's used. Human creativity, on the other hand, is not limited by these factors and can come up with entirely new and unique ideas. Gen AI can enhance and boost human creativity by sparking new ideas and new imagination. That's what generative AI thinks about replacing human creativity. We have the next one then is that it's quick and easy to deploy. And I think while parts of it are quick and easy to deploy, if you're thinking about it in an enterprise context where you're either putting it in the hands of internal users or putting it in the hands of the public that interact and engage with the organization, this statement doesn't hold true. So as I say, ChatGPT, it took years to develop, it took a long time to train, and it had a huge amount of cost. It's still not quite there, and we'll get into some of the risks around using it. But like I say, it still has that October 21 where it's unaware of anything that has come after it. It being quick and easy to deploy, I think the leveraging of what's there may be quick and easy to deploy, but to build that large language model, to keep it trained and up to date, it's still very costly and it takes time. AI is going to take over the world. So I think for anybody that's seen the Terminator movies, I think there's been a preconception out there that Skynet is coming to get us, and that AI and Arnold Schwarzenegger are coming. And again, I'm gonna see what the AI had to say. So it says this is a common misconception that's perpetuated by science fiction movies and books. Generative AI is only as dangerous as the humans who create and use it. It's important to remember that Gen AI is a tool that can be used both for good and for bad. As long as it's developed and used responsibly, there's no reason to fear it. Still a little concerning, but I suppose in an enterprise context, when you're looking at organizations, there is an inherent need to be able to do things responsibly. And within generative AI, there will be biases because there is bias in the underlying data sets. There are errors within the underlying data sets, and we'll talk about those now in a second. But I think the AI coming to take over the world is something that, ultimately this is something that can generate new content. It's on humans to take that content and decide for themselves whether it's valid and true, or whether it's something that that you need to do more research on. It's not the last answer to any question. It's something that will allow you to spark thought, do some more research, and validate before you start to use it. I think there was an interesting case in the States where a lawyer in court quoted a case that he had taken from ChatGPT, which turned out to be completely fictional. So there is definitely an element of using your own judgment, or people using their own judgments when it comes to the output from the ChatGPT, and there is research that's needed to make sure that it's true and that it's valid.
Is there other concerns as well? There's that white male Western bias.
Absolutely.
In the some development, there's the technological developments.
Absolutely. So there is so it says the misconception is that it's accurate and unbiased, but ultimately the data that it's trained on is inaccurate inherently and it's biased. So there does have to be, it's interesting, they say that there's a quote out there that says, ChatGPT, the response that it gives is correct 80% of the time, but it's 100% confident in its response. So it will give you an answer to whatever question, no matter whether it's absolutely true or pure nonsense. So the old adage of for anybody who's been involved in data or reporting or business intelligence or whatever it might be, the garbage in, garbage out absolutely applies here. The garbage that goes in will be trained on and it will be used as a response, even though it could be complete nonsense. So as I say, every user of these generative AI, it's all, I suppose the way we're looking at it at the moment is it's something to produce a first draft or a first cut. And then after that, there has to be human intervention that says whether or not this is accurate or valid, or whether or not you have to go back to the drawing board. And that profession of prompt engineering is something, it's so important because the prompt has to be asked in the right way to get the right result. So for those first drafts to come out more and more accurate, or accurate more and more of the time, the prompts have to become more and more valid, or they have to be able to miss the right response.
Do you see that the underlying mechanics of this is one thing, and the data that's sitting on is another thing? So similar to your discussion earlier about public sector, is there an opportunity or someone looking at this to take those mechanics and apply the right data set so that it actually, in a much, as you said, a much smaller scope, to be actually valid and useful 99% of the time?
Yeah.
Those mechanics are separate from the data, I'm assuming.
They are separate. So that public sector example is exactly that, where you're taking the algorithm that parses the data and finds the right answer to the prompt, and you're training it on a very specific data set.
And are those mechanics available are they openly available, or are they something that's locked away by the Microsofts and the Googles? It's kind of maybe like Windows, years and years ago, Windows was opened up for people to develop, whereas now, is that infrastructure available to people to be able to take it and apply it to a smaller set of data?
The Microsoft one isn't, but there are ones that are open source that are available that are very similar to it. Now, I suppose the challenge with these sorts of things is what usually happens is it gets very busy, you have lots of applications out there, they come at whether they're open source or low cost. And then as they evolve, then people start to, they need to monetize them. So they need to start charging for them. So as you look to maintain them or to develop them in the future, like if you invest in it now, or sorry, if you decide to implement it now, it may come at a cost down the road. So, but the because it's such a hot topic and it's such a new area of technology, there's a huge amount of developer focus on it, and people are trying it out and seeing what they can do with it. So there's a lot of open source versions out there that will allow you to do something very similar to what the big players are doing.
Will it ever become whereby years and years ago when you're selling an operating system, and it becomes maybe like selling an operating system in Microsoft selling this as an operating system that developers can engage with to develop in scenarios like the public sector? Is that crazy or is that
could do? But I'd say what'll happen is you'll have an application that comes out that does something very specific that you can deploy locally. I suppose one of the major concerns with the large language models is anything you put into it goes out into the public sphere. So if you're asking it proprietary questions or anything that has confidential information in it, you're putting that in the public sphere. Whereas the one that you can deploy locally, you can ring fence within your own organization and you're not sending that data out. So I think particularly say for organizations that have a large legacy IT estate, there's a huge interest in being able to refactor COBOL code into something more modern or to move away from mainframes. So ChatGPT will, as I say, will give you the first draft of that. But ultimately, you're putting your whole code base out into ChatGPT, and you don't know who has access to that. So.
Would it be practicable for, just looking at it from a board point of view, to ask people to disclose when they use AI for a paper, for example, that they put something at the bottom to say, this is, just I suppose as a
that is one of the challenges at the moment, that it's almost impossible to tell whether, apart from say college professors and teachers are having real difficulty because they're getting papers in and they don't know who it's come from or who's written it. And if you don't have the exact prompt that was used to generate it, you can't recreate it. So there's nothing out there at the moment in say the large language models that say has a metadata tag that says this has come from AI.
which you can require employees, for example, they're submitting papers to put a health warning at the bottom
Yeah.
of advertising.
You should be. I think speaking of something that was
Purely AI.
You were talking
Isn't there something European or something that's been discussed at the moment whether or not they make it either a guideline or a rule that not to disclose? This week or last week there was
Yeah, I think there was already.
that's right.
Yeah.
I just can't remember the as the UK I was looking at, just kind of catching the soundbite on the news where they are thinking about bringing that in as a guideline or a rule to say that you must.
So an organization could, and I suppose it's on the, within the honor code that says that the employees are actually going to do it. But it is something that you could include to say that has, or at least a version of it was drafted using generative AI. I think it's interesting the AI Act was released, I think it's in the last week or two, but AI has been around for a number of years now, and the ability for large oversight committees like whether it's the EU or whoever it might be able to keep up with the rapidly moving technology landscape is very, very, very difficult. So there is almost and we saw that with GDPR as well, where a lot of organizations have to do a lot of rework with GDPR because they weren't compliant with the guidelines, well not the guidelines, but the rules that came out under GDPR. There were some organizations who were already operating under some of those guidelines, which meant that it was less work when the act actually came through. So there is a bit about organizations taking their own view on how far we're going to take this, what sort of guidelines or guardrails are we going to put around it, because ultimately something is going to come down the road that's going to force organizations to completely rethink what they're doing with AI and how they've implemented things up to that point. So it is, I suppose, we have a trustworthy AI framework that we use to assess the use of artificial intelligence, and ultimately, I suppose it's trying to get ahead of what is likely to come from a regulatory perspective, because it'll come and it'll happen, and we're trying to mitigate against that huge amount of rework that will have to be done, and the cost that's associated with that rework.
Much work going on data classification. So right now the around conspiracy theories getting kind of equal weighting with Harvard Business Publication or something. Are there companies working through classifying data or grading them around likelihood of accuracy?
It's yes. So I wouldn't say it's widespread. Certainly not what we're seeing at the moment. I think there is a tacit understanding within organizations on how much quality they have within their data sets and how much cleansing needs to be done before they do any of this sort of work. And the sensitivity of data is, for sure, there has been work that's happened over the last number of years. And again, a lot of that was driven by GDPR, because the sensitivity of customer data became, it was much more sensitive after the implementation of GDPR. So that started a lot of work around sensitivity, who has access to what data. And there's still work being done on trying to clean up some of, and lots of organizations have data all over the place. You have instances of customer data across, and if you think about the banks, most of the products that they sell have an individual underlying system that serves that product. And so you have customer data across all of the different products that every individual owns. So it's very difficult to try and figure out what's where and what sort of shape it's in. But ultimately, the sensitivity is something that a lot of work has happened on over the last number of years. But like that, it takes something like GDPR coming for people to start really thinking about it and investing in it. Okay. So some of the benefits and the risks of generative AI, and we've gone through a number of these already. I suppose in the first instance, it does accelerate the output of content across all of the different formats that we saw earlier. It can increase task automation because, as I say, it does produce that first draft of content. So I suppose in our own world, and this is going to be very disruptive, I suppose, to how we operate. But when you think about the reports that we produce, the proposals or the RFTs that we produce, that automation of the first draft of content is something that's possible. We're not doing it at the moment because we still need to fully assess the impact. But the work that's done to produce any sort of deliverable, that first could be automated. Because of that, it can drive cost efficiencies because you don't need to employ as many people in producing that first draft of content. You don't need as many people pulling the information together, doing the research. Generative AI can research a far greater data set than any individual or group of humans can. So it's able to draw from a lot more inputs and a lot more sources. It can improve the customer experience, and I suppose with the example of the AI that I mentioned for local, the intention is never to put that AI in front of the customer or the citizen. The intention is that if a citizen or a customer calls the call center agent, that they have that beside them and they're able to assess the response that the AI gives before they give that response to the person on the other end of the call or the other end of the email. So it can improve the customer experience because it's quicker in that it's able to assess all of the various different interaction points that the customer has, and you're able to pinpoint and find the issue that they have a lot quicker. And then finally, because it's trained on very large data sets, where as a board member or as a CEO or as somebody who's in upper management, it's able to produce output across a much greater set of data. And so where you might get a specific report on a specific area, it can produce content across, and it can assess and collate data from a much wider area or field. So it can provide more decision-making inputs to your process. Again, I think we've gone through a number of the risks. I mentioned the inaccuracy. So as I say, the stat around ChatGPT is that it's 80% right, 100% confident, but 80% right. All of these do have that inherent bias within it. So if the underlying training data set is biased, which in the case of the internet, it naturally is, there will be bias within the data set. With ChatGPT, because we're not exactly sure what it's been trained on, the suspicion is that it has been trained on IP that's belonging to individuals. If you're using the output of ChatGPT and it contains something that's copyrighted or is considered IP, then the likelihood is that you will be in violation of that copyright. So that's something to consider when you're using it. There's privacy, so as I mentioned, anything that goes in, so if you put sensitive data in, it will retain the sensitive data and it'll be used in the upcoming training. And then, as mentioned, it can be used by bad people to do bad things. So that unethical use is something that's definitely worth considering. So we've put together a generative AI lab, and the reason for it is because, as we can see here, there is a huge amount of interest in this area. What we do at the lab is we go through a session like this to go through the one-on-one, but then really it's about getting the group to start to build and generate content themselves. So that's kind of the first couple of hours is the overview session and and kind of getting your hands dirty, giving it a go. And then in the second half, we start to look at the opportunities and the implications organization that you're working with, and then start to see if there are opportunities for us. What's the 100-day plan, I suppose? What sort of capability do you need to develop, and how do you get started with it, I suppose? So that's a lab that we offer. Very useful. We've had good engagement and good uptake with it, and like that, I suppose it's a one-on-one, I guess, in starting to make people more familiar with what's out there, talk about some of the benefits, but also obviously some of the concerns that are out there as well, and how it can be used within your organization. So that's all the content I had prepared, but very happy to take any questions that you might have.
Can I just ask about search and the future of search?
Yeah.
As you're talking through it, just Google keeps coming to my mind as ChatGPT, the new form of Google. And how they've monetized that, and obviously that developed its whole ecosystem and all the apps associated with phones and everything. Where do you see the future of that? Is this going to overtake that, or is it side by side?
So Microsoft has started to build it into the Bing search results, so its version of Google. I would see it definitely playing a part. Like what at the moment, Google will point you to somewhere else where you can get your content. I think if I know there are concerns from organizations where Google are using the data that is got in its search algorithm to surface that without actually pointing them into the website where the content comes from. So I believe that some organizations have come together to take a case against Google, and that's still ongoing. So I think there are big implications for the search providers, because if you have generative AI that's surfacing data from a website without actually sending the individual to the website, the people will start to block the search engine, because ultimately they're trying to drive traffic to themselves. So it's an interesting space. As I say, Windows or Microsoft have started to include some of the Gen AI results in what they surface back in search results. We'll get to the point where a generative AI just takes over or replaces the search engine completely. But it's definitely a space worth watching, because like that, Google without their ads, there's no revenue generation without the ad content.
But likewise for the advertisers.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
In the organizations you work with, this is moving so fast. Who do you, who are they assigning ownership in terms of understanding and keeping up with what's going on? Is it generally the IT, or is it, because it's a mix of IT data, there's a lot going on there. Who do you see them assigning ownership in the organization?
Yeah, it's a real mix. Typically, it's coming through the CIO. So the CIO is usually being tasked with having a look to see what's out there and how it might be relevant. There are some organizations where they have dedicated, whether it's a digital factory or an area that looks after new and emerging technologies to see what the implications are within the organization. But typically, it's seen as a tech play. Now, and I suppose that it kind of makes sense at the moment because the large language models that are out there, you can't necessarily deploy them for enterprise yet, but you can build things yourself that will do something similar. So there is a need to have IT or the IT org involved in that because they're going to have to build something. Yeah. I'm sure there are. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I suspect like the power consumption and the processing power that goes into these things is massive. So I would suspect that like similar to blockchain a few years ago or Bitcoin, like the power consumption that's being used to run these things is very, very significant. Now I suppose with the likes of ChatGPT, the main the main energy consumer is the training of the model. So they haven't done that for the last 18 months. So actually interrogating the data itself isn't a very heavy load. It's the training of the model is where you see the real, I suppose, hit on the sustainability agenda. So I think when it comes to trying to train it and keep it up to date, that's going to be one of the factors that they're going to have to think about is how green it's going to be. Sure.
Talk a little bit about monetization of this. So how companies are monetizing it now, and whether the principal side of Google ads results back, and then the kind of downstream providers of video, have they monetized it? What do they charge to them?
Yeah, so it's interesting because the main tech players, they're not necessarily monetizing the output itself. What they're doing is they're integrating it as new features within their existing product set. So for the likes of Microsoft, they have a product called Colab, which is for software engineers. It's a tool that they use to build their code and write their code and test their code. Microsoft are including some of the ChatGPT output into Colab or Copilot, sorry. So it will make suggestions on, say comments that you should put on your code or how you make it more efficient or the types of test cases that you should run. So they're not necessarily monetizing our ChatGPT, but including it in the existing product set. For the application use, or say the applications that we saw on the right hand side of the screen, it's varied. So for EI.io, they charge, so you can pay a monthly fee and you can generate as much content as you like. You can pay an annual fee, which is slightly less. So typically they're charging by whether it's a time period or some of them charge by output, whether it's the amount of minutes that you've used or the number of 3D renderings that you do. It's quite varied. But the main players, as I say, they're not necessarily. So to integrate into it, there isn't a cost at the moment. They're upselling, I suppose, on their existing product suite.
That like the change is it becomes more popular and people get used to using it for their lives, and all of a sudden the subscription bill comes in.
Yeah, it's hard to say because the likes of Google wouldn't have that model at the moment, really. Most of the content that they have, it's provided using APIs or it's provided for free. All of the revenue comes from the advertising. But really, it'll be interesting to see where Google in particular go with this because obviously there's a huge cost that's associated with it, but their products you don't necessarily have a huge user interaction, so it's you're not going to drive as much ad revenue as you would say with the Google search. So I think there's a lot of the players out there are doing it because somebody else is doing it and they don't want to fall behind. And I don't think they've really fully thought out how they're going to monetize it and how they're going to pay for it. But Microsoft, I think, are probably the ones who are clearest about what their monetization strategy is, and that's to leverage it within their toolkit.
What do you see in organizations that are sort of ahead of the game really on this? So if you're sitting at the board, you're saying, I'm going to take this to the next stage, or is there somebody there is it still very much experimental? Trying to understand what it can do or what it can't do.
That's it. It's still very, very much experimental. I think really, ChatGPT has only been out since November last year. I don't think it's quite there yet in terms of the maturity, and this is kind of generally around all of them. A lot of them will use, say, the Microsoft stuff that comes as part of an upgrade package. So you might have users on Copilot who are using it without necessarily knowing that it's ChatGPT that's sitting behind it. There's still a lot of research that's going into it. I think people are trying it out, but enterprise haven't really adopted it fully yet. I think it'll be a while to go before that starts to happen. You might get it for quite specific things where it improves the productivity in producing a set of reports, or it was interesting. She was with one of the public sector bodies, and they were saying that they spend, I think they were saying about 20 grand on training videos and videos that go out to the public, and there was a huge amount of interest in the video there because effectively there's no cost associated. So there's those sorts of things, but they're still very much being in assessment and trying to figure out what they can do within that's not going to have a major impact on, that will go publicly wrong, I suppose. That could go wrong.
2021 cut-off point as well is very significant.
Yeah, very significant. Yeah, and there's no plan or there's no published plan on when it's going to be trained again. So I'm sure there will be an
absolutely. Inevitability. It's just a test. Just for organisations, I suppose, to understand that limitation is probably very important.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that they could do with having a big banner at the top of ChatGPT that says, exactly.
But is there some mention it was like a developer version of that you pay for it and that will give you more access, isn't there? But is that still at the same time frame?
So there's APIs that are there. I don't think you have to pay for it. But I can check. Maybe if you're building an application off it, we have a team that have been building out different use cases using different generative AIs for the past 6 weeks, I think, and they've been trying out different things to see, I suppose, how mature it is, how complex it is, what sort of business impact you have from all of the different ones. There's been no charge for any of the ones that we've done so far, and most of them integrate with ChatGPT because that's the ones out there.
So just maybe for our last question, for the people who are going back, to board meetings, are there any kind of key questions they should be asking, or what are the areas we should kind of focus on now?
I think there's a question around policy within the organisation. So what is the policy around generative AI, or is there a policy on generative AI? And I think the genie is out of the bottle with this thing. Really, it's out there. People are using it, whether you like it or not. It's there. So for organisations to have guidelines on what it can and can't be used for, if it can be used for anything, but also if you are going to produce something, that there has to be some level of human intervention afterwards, because you can't just put it out in the public sphere yet. It's just not ready yet. I think that at this level, I think the policy is the most important consideration, and the guidelines. And I suppose if you're getting to the point where there is going to be use of it, that you have the right training that comes into the ethical use of it, and also